of speed, courage, and sometimes tragedy, this sport, once limited to the back roads, has sped to the front row of our national pastimes. Powering the move are a few select dynasties that have given NASCAR its core identity, its character. From Daytona International Speedway, this is ESPN Ultimate NASCAR, The Families. I'm Jerry Punch. From the Pettys to the Allisons to the Earnhardts, families have formed the backbone of NASCAR to its millions upon millions of fans whose hearts ride in every car, in every race.
The effort is there. It's always there. But it's especially difficult for the Pettys, Kyle and Patty, to keep things lighthearted before this race in Loudon, New Hampshire. For Kyle and Patty, Loudon isn't just another stop on the Nextel Cup schedule.
Father in heaven, out of your infinite love, you have called us into being.
They lost their son Adam here when he was only 19 years old.
Be present in a special way to the drivers in today's race.
That was the first time I'd ever seen Loudon. And you would think that after losing a child that time heals that, but that's not true. Because you realize that a lot of time has gone by since you lost your child. It gets harder, I think, with time.
Bobby and Judy Allison went to Adam's funeral together, even though they were divorced, and Bobby's jaw still tightened at the mention of his longtime rival, Richard Petty, Kyle's dad. But it was not a time for false pride, only shared pain.
Carry a picture of him in my wallet. That's my favorite picture. I look at it a lot. I show it to people a lot.
Bobby and Judy Allison understand. They know the depth of the Pettys' despair. The Allisons lost their two sons, Davy and Clifford.
Davy's smiling for the camera. Davy always did what he's supposed to do, and Clifford is giving him a set of horns behind his head. You know, and Davy has no idea that's happening. Here Clifford's hit another home run, and Davy's just being Davy.
When Dale Earnhardt Jr. was trapped in a fiery crash in Sonoma, he said he felt as if his father was looking down on him from heaven and had snatched him from the jaws of death.
I know why I get in the car, and then I know that next time I get in might be the last time I get in. And if racing's what I want to do, I'll risk dying to do it.
Three names, three bloodlines, woven like vines into the tapestry of NASCAR tradition. Binding it together, connecting the years, a thread stretching across time. A value system in a seam, a foundation in three names: Earnhardt, Allison, Petty. In NASCAR's relatively short history, these are the dynasties, the driving forces, the fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, for whom NASCAR is more than a livelihood. For these families of NASCAR, it is a way of life.
The highs are higher than everyday life, and the lows are much worse.
There it is! Davy Allison wins! What a day in history! Dale Earnhardt Jr.
Disaster in this stuff can be worse than disaster as the American public knows it.
Oh, we have a problem. Blowing the tire. Bobby Allison with a horrible crash here on the front stretch.
After the accident in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500.
Big trouble. Big wreck behind.
We've lost Dale Earnhardt.
NASCAR is not about cars. It's about human beings and human dreams and human hopes and aspirations and fears and taking chances and living and dying and worse than dying. To be triumphant, you have to take the chance of disaster every day.
I got a letter from a lady, and she said, never put a question mark where God's put a period. To me, that explains everything. And so I used that and I accepted that clause.
God didn't need any special punctuation for the statement he made when creating Level Cross, North Carolina. It is plain as day. This rural outpost on the far edges of Greensboro, where Richard Petty was raised.
We lived in a house that had no electricity, no running water, no telephone, lived on a dirt road. And we was happy as June bugs.
Lee Petty, the family patriarch, grew up during the Depression. Jobs were scarce, so he'd hop on a train to look for work.
You get off the train and met with people with guns, and they'd give them a choice. You know, you can either stay here and die, or you can get back on the train and live. They didn't want people coming in and taking their jobs.
Other times, he'd go to New Orleans to bare-knuckle fight. Anything for $1. When he returned to North Carolina, he worked as a farmer, trucker, and a mechanic on some of the early moonshine cars. And then eventually, moonshine delivery became a steady way to pay the household bills.
Is it true that fellas got ready for stock car racing by racing revenue agents?
Well, I'm not really going to commit myself to that, Haywood, because I guess there's a few internal revenue people still around.
Lee would sell you a case of moonshine whiskey, and he would say, you know where Mount Carmel Church is? Down on such and such a road, Gray's Chapel Road or something. Yeah, okay. There's a graveyard out there. Tonight at 10 o'clock, right behind that tombstone will be your case of whiskey. Richard joked about it once. He said, you know, I never hurt my back that much racing, but I hurt my back a lot helping Daddy carry cases of whiskey out in the graveyard tonight.
You know, it was a shady way of making a living, but people had to do what they had to do to make money. They wasn't really proud of that part of their life, and so we don't talk about it a lot.
When stock car racing started to flourish after World War II, Lee took his hobby, racing, and made it a family business.
I was at the very first race. I was like 11 years old. My daddy read in the paper that Bill France was having a race at Charlotte. So my mother, my brother, and daddy drove the car to Charlotte. And it was a strictly stock car. They stopped at the Texaco station. They pulled it up on the rack. They jacked it up, took the hubcaps off of it, took the muffler off of it, put a number on the thing. We was ready to race. They run about halfway through the race and blows the tire, turns over, tears all the doors off of it. We have to thumb away home.
It was an honor code, a brand of toughness and pride instilled in his sons, Maurice and Richard. Tightly knit, the Petty men defended the family honor at all times and at all costs.
He had an abrasive relationship with a lot of the other drivers. Tiny Lund comes to mind. He and Lee became arch enemies. There was a race at half-mile Greensboro Fairgrounds track. They were introducing the drivers, and Lee and Tiny passed on the stage. Well, some words were passed, and a fight broke out. Tiny Lund was killing Lee.
They was rolling around, beating on each other. And me and my brother was there, and we got right in the middle of it.
And they go to the rescue of their father. Tiny's killing all three Pettys. Finally, Mrs. Petty goes to the rescue of her husband and her 2 sons.
Mother just walked up with her pocketbook and popped him upside the head. That was the end of the fight.
You wouldn't think a purse could do that much damage, but this particular purse had a .38 pistol inside of it.
Elsewhere in North Carolina, another young man was trying to find a way to put food on the table. He was tired of working in the local textile mill. Ralph Earnhardt, a man of few words, took to the dirt tracks around the Carolinas to squeeze out a living.
When he told me he wanted to drive, I threatened to leave him. And of course that didn't work too good, so I joined him. Before Ralph started driving and took me to this little dirt track, and I wore a white dress and dressed up to go to this race. Of course, I came home, I had a red dress. It was red dirt.
Ralph did everything himself. His operation was small scale compared to Lee Petty's. The Earnhardt name remained a local one. Ralph chose to stay close to home and race in the sportsman division, the junior varsity of stock car racing, where he was a star, winning a points championship in 1956.
Earnhardt battling Bobby Allison.
In the sportsman division, he was the man to beat. He didn't mind putting the bumper to you, and he would wait to the end of the race, like the last lap or 2 laps to go or whatever, so you wouldn't have time to get him back.
Ralph's name was buried deep in the history books. A mere scrap of footage remains as proof that Ralph Earnhardt was not a ghost.
Ralph, it looks as though they found something wrong with Yarborough's car. Is that right?
Well, they found an illegal wheel on it.
And this would make you the winner if this protest is allowed, huh?
Well, I guess it do. We all knew about it.
One of his boys began working for him out back in the garage when he was just 10 years old.
Dale always said that he could go out the next morning and look at the race car and tell if his dad had won or not. If he had won, the front, there wouldn't be no dirt on the front of it. It would be clean.
When you're a racing family, it's born and bred into you. Every time my daddy got in a car, or every time Dale got in a car, every time Dale Jr. gets in a car, we get in that car with them. And we're always proud and happy when they get out of them successful and when they get out of them alive.
The tide would make for an unreliable witness, endlessly shifting, each successive wave a reordering of the one before. It doesn't record, but reflects the ebbs and crests of the lives played out alongside it. The cycles of the tide hold the secret to understanding the stories of the Pettys, the Allisons, and the Earnhardts.
I went to Daytona in 1959, 21-year-old kid. We come through the tunnel, and that looked like the biggest place in the world. I mean, you couldn't even hardly see the first and second corner. A few little grandstands, no buildings, nothing.
Daytona will always be part of our family. It'll always be that love-hate relationship that you have with things like that.
You feel Tim and Fonnie Flock, you feel Buck Baker, you feel Lee Petty. There's the ghost of Fireball Roberts there. There's the ghost of Dale Earnhardt Sr. there. Those guys are there.
Daytona, a 2.5-mile steep banked oval, opened in 1959. It was unlike any track the drivers had ever seen.
If you had a driver that said that he was not afraid to run at Daytona, you better find another driver. They were dealing with all kinds of new technology, new styles of driving, the beginning of drafting. It was a scary place.
The first Daytona 500 in 1959 had it all. A young man who would be king started, but didn't finish that day. It looked like his old man, Lee Petty, might have been nipped at the finish line until 3 days later it was announced that number 42, Petty, beat out number 73, Johnny Beauchamp, in a photo finish. Over the years, Daytona Beach provided the Pettys with moments triumphant and traumatic. In the 1961 qualifying races, a crash all but ended Lee Petty's competitive career.
Went into the hospital, and he's laying there about half dead. And he said, "You and your brother go home, get another car, and start working on it. You know, racing's our business, we got to go racing."
Lee Petty was in the hospital down there for several months, and Elizabeth, his wife, stayed down there with him. Richard and Maurice came home with no guidance whatsoever, and they just about closed the shop.
It was a struggle. I mean, all of a sudden, everything fell on me and my brother. So you can grow up really, really fast when you got a family behind you that you got to look after.
Father in heaven, the hand of your loving kindness, powerfully yet gently, guides
Kitty Allison, a devout Catholic all her life, is at a morning mass in her nursing home. It's her birthday.
Spirit to unite us.
She's 100 years old.
You know, someone asked me, do trophies balance off all of the sufferings that can occur in life?
In her century of living, she gave birth to 13 children. 3 of her boys, Bobby, Donnie, and Eddie, made stock car racing their career.
You just cannot keep this family down, especially Bobby. Certainly there's no one in NASCAR I've ever known who is more independent-minded. Bobby, his entire career, wasn't just walking against the wind. He was walking into a hurricane the entire time, and by golly, he was going to beat that hurricane.
You ever heard the song "I Did It My Way"? That fits Bobby Allison. No disrespect or anything else, he never made a mistake. If you don't believe it, ask him.
The Allison brothers migrated to Alabama from Florida because the prize money was a little better there. They formed a core of what racing fans would eventually call the Alabama Gang.
When he moved from Florida to Alabama, you know, he would sleep in the back of his truck with his brother and eat peaches, you know, and live off of the race earnings.
Alongside me, Bobby and Donnie Allison, 2 of the greatest drivers in the business.
Bobby Allison would race anytime, anywhere. But he didn't start running regularly in Grand National Cup races until 1966.
Allison into the pits.
When he wasn't racing, he was in the shop, burning the midnight oil. No days off.
We brought the car home one time from Winston-Salem in a bushel basket and had to be to Darlington by noon on Thursday and never went to bed.
If he could have, Bobby Allison would have driven the race car, pulled into the pits, unbuckled, jumped out, changed the tires, filled it full of gas, jumped back in, strapped in, and gone on. Because he would feel like everything had been done right.
Then Bobby Allison becomes successful. But is he really successful in his mind? Not as long as he has to live in the shadow of Richard Petty, the 43.
Bobby Allison dives low in the 3rd turn and takes back first place.
Richard Petty was the first hurricane that Bobby Allison drove straight into. Between 1960 and 1967, Petty won 75 races, including a record 27 in 1967. He was now officially the king.
Richard was an Arnold Palmer with fractured grammar. He was always easygoing. He was always accessible. He always had things to say.
He had another one, I think, threw the fan belt off the thing, and like I was racing with Allison there and didn't pay no attention, and the thing ran too hot before I caught it and blew it.
I told them guys, I don't speak English. I speak Southern American, and I'm damn proud of it.
We were in Malta, New York, 2.5 hours after the race was over. The trucks had loaded up and left, there was Richard Petty, the king, still signing autographs in the pouring rain. It has this sort of floral autograph. It has a lot of curlicues in it. And I asked him why he did that one time. He says, it gives me at least another second with a person that wanted my autograph.
He has this ability to make every person there feel like he is the greatest Richard Petty fan in the world.
I really envied that. I admired it, envied it, the whole thing. And so if somebody asked me for mine, it was an honor for me to give them an autograph. And then it became a challenge, you know, how close to him can I get?
Today, Bobby Allison seems so backslappingly Richard. At one time, they were so different. Bobby, intense, volatile, and Richard, easygoing.
See, that's me, and that's when I won in 1988.
Bobby felt that NASCAR favored Richard. His little garage in Alabama was always playing David to the Goliath that was Petty Enterprises.
This is the engine room. I spent lots and lots of hours. Well, it was a combination of engine room and machine shop.
Petty and Allison, it was the most bloodthirsty battle that's ever been. And I mean, it was the Hatfields and McCoys of NASCAR racing.
The roles of the Petty brothers were firmly established. Maurice built the engines, Richard drove the cars. Racing was in their blood. It was their life, and they guarded their turf ferociously.
Daddy he was known as a as a hard man to get along with. He loved his brother, and he would do anything to protect his family. When you messed with Richard, he was ready to just jump down their throat.
When his crew came around and said anything, whether it was Maurice or any of the other guys, you know, I just said, go fly a kite.
You know, we had a big, well, had 3 or 4 different situations. We got in a little bit of trouble with each other.
There was an incident in West Islip, New York, where they traded fists rather than paint.
I went over and told Bobby what I thought about it. Swung at him.
Maurice slugged at me a couple times, knocked me down. When I was down, somebody kicked me in the back.
They got to the point where they would almost rather wreck each other than win the race.
We'll go to Wilkesboro, and I'm leading one lap, and he knocks me in the wall. He's leading the next lap, I knock him in the wall.
They beat each other like bongo drums for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 laps. Both cars were just smoking.
There were several fights in the grandstand. One of Bobby's fans tried to get into victory lane, and I imagine he wished he hadn't.
That day in North Wilkesboro, Maurice took out one Allison fan with Richard's helmet before the King stepped in.
Finally, Bobby and myself met in the parking lot at Riverside and said, hey, time out. Before we hurt somebody, hurt ourselves, hurt somebody else, let's just call a truce to this. And from then on, I guess we raced and probably run into each other, but nothing ever come out of anything.
It's a whole lot better to punch the guy in the nose than it is to punch him in the fender, because on a racetrack, somebody can end up dead.
What went on between the men went on the track. We stayed with our children in the infield. Our children all played together. I was good friends with Bobby's wife, his sisters, his mother.
The kids, they would play football in the infield and in swimming pools at the motels.
You cannot dislike Bobby Allison. I knew him from hanging out at the swimming pool with Davey or with Clifford. He was always a good guy.
We're family people, he's family people, and our crowd gets along good together.
In the early days, you could get his goat real easily. I had said something derogatory about him at the race that we had somewhere where he about wrecked me or something. So it's in the Greensboro paper next day, big headline. So they come to the racetrack the next day with the big article. And they said, what do you think Earnhardt and them is going to say when they read this? And I said, you don't have to worry about that. They can't read.
Do something you thoroughly enjoy, and you look forward to getting up every day to go do, and to make a living, make money at it too. That's pretty neat.
These mill villages, as Kannapolis was, where the Earnhardts came from, they were very insulated. Most people were kind of like deer. They didn't go much more than 5 miles from where they were born. They were shy, unsure of themselves, and lacked the confidence to really socially integrate. I can remember right after he won the first championship, and it came too fast. He wasn't ready for it. And I was just chewing him out one day for something he was doing. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "Don't do that." He said, "Help me."
In 75, I went over and asked him if I could talk to him. He was painfully shy. I could not get him to look me in the eye. And I finally said, Dale, I saw your daddy turn Banjo Matthews over at McCormickville. You were there? And I said, yeah, I was there. He said, tell me about it. So I told him, and he opened up and told me his hopes and dreams.
The primer beneath the varnish, the engine under the hood. Throughout Dale Earnhardt's rise to prominence, his admirers wondered what it was that drove him out of the mill town of Kannapolis, North Carolina, and onto the racetrack with such abandon, such need. Peel back the layers of the man to reveal a relationship, the one he shared with his father. The search always leads here.
Our dad was gone a lot, raced a lot, so you're always competing for attention. Because you had to compete for it and it was so limited, it made you crave it even more.
Dale was hard-headed. Like all young kids, they think they know more than the parent does, and they butted heads a lot, but it's because they were so much alike. He did discipline. He was a hard discipline, but he did it really for the right reasons.
Dale's best friend had taken some of his marbles, and he saw his best friend and his mother leave the house, so he went up to the house and went in and got his marbles. And his daddy found out that he had gone in the house with no one there, and he said he wore him out with a belt.
But Dale idolized his dad, who he was, what he did. And so racing is what Dale always wanted to do.
If Daddy ever let him pick up a tool and do anything responsible, Dale was perfectly happy. He would have done it 24 hours a day.
Dale quit school and wanted to race, and his dad told him to get out and find him a ride if he wanted to drive. He wouldn't put him in a race car.
On a fall morning in 1973, Ralph Earnhardt was alone in his modest home when he suffered a massive heart attack. He was dead at 45.
After his father died, Dale was still struggling to try to race. I did all I could to help him, but financially we just didn't have the money.
A 9th grade education, no funds, no father. Dale Earnhardt strode doggedly into the tough world of racing. There were 2 failed marriages. The first produced a son, KERRY, who would be raised by a stepfather. The second marriage produced a daughter, Kelly, and a son, Dale Jr.
Dale Earnhardt was not a great father. Dale Earnhardt was a very selfish individual. Dale Earnhardt knew only one thing, and that was how to drive a race car. And he also knew that that was the only way he was going to be able to put food on the table for his family.
Dale would borrow $500 on short notes in the bank just to buy tires and go race. There were times early in his racing career that he told me one time, he said, we probably ought to have been on welfare.
He was a take-no-prisoners type driver that had just as soon push you out of the way as race you out of the way. The difference between running third and running second might be just $15, but he needs that money.
I got a call about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was Dale. I mean, he was at the bottom, absolute bottom of everything. And he said, I wiped my car out up at Asheville, and I don't know what to do. Well, I mean, how bad is it? And he says, it's bad. It's gone. I said, well, your former father-in-law, Robert G., he's got a great dirt race car underneath a tarp over there. Maybe you can talk him into getting that out. He went over there, and Robert said, well, you got to work on it. And somebody loaned him an engine. That became a rocket ship. He just started winning prolifically, and the rest is history.
He made history quickly. In his first full season, 1979, Earnhardt was Rookie of the Year. In his next season, he won his first Winston Cup championship.
Dale Earnhardt was not afraid to swap paint with you, no matter what track you were at. He could come step on your toe, physically or verbally, and make you smile about it.
You could identify with Dale Earnhardt Sr. He wasn't intimidating to us as a fan because he was what we wanted to be. You know, Dale Earnhardt couldn't sign his name until he had already run a dozen then Winston Cup races. And he finally went to a friend of his, the late Joe Whitlock. And he said, Joe, can you teach me how to sign my name? Because I think it's going to be worth something someday.
February 18th, 1979. The entire eastern portion of the country, from Georgia north to Maine, was besieged by a blizzard.
From the world's center of speed, welcome to the 21st annual Daytona 500.
White flag is out. 1 lap to go.
So with 1 lap to go, Donnie Allison was in the lead.
All come down to this.
Bad luck had snatched 2 Daytona 500 victories from him. But now he roared towards the finish line and stock car racing's most prestigious prize.
Where will Cale make his move? He comes to the inside. Donnie Allison throws the block. Cale hits him. He slides. Donnie Allison slides. They hit again. They drive into the turn. They're hitting the wall. They're head on the wall. They're out of it. Who is going to win it? Petty is out in front at the line. Walter to the inside. Petty wins it.
That day was probably the most hurt I had ever been in my life to that point. To win the Daytona 500 is a tremendous accomplishment, and I should have won it 3 times.
As Petty celebrated, Bobby Allison drove past his brother to offer him a ride back to the garage. Bobby saw Cale Yarborough. Words were exchanged, and the rest is NASCAR folklore.
And there's a fight between Cale Yarborough and Allison. The tempers overflowing.
And he lunged at me and hit me in the face with his helmet. I looked, and blood's dripping down into my lap. It cut my lip and bloodied my nose. And I said to myself, I'll get a handle this right now or run from him the rest of my life. So I climbed out of the car, and he went to beating on my fist with his nose.
Cale Yarborough there, very upset.
I'm just thankful that he didn't ever hit me that day, because it would have been bad. It would have been very bad. If Cale had raised his fist at Donnie at that moment, Cale Yarborough would have been dead, because Donnie Allison's fist could kill you.
People still look back and call that race the moment that put NASCAR on the map, like the Colts-Giants championship game in '58 had done for football.
Well, I tell you, I lost some this close, but this is the first time I remember in a long time I won one this close.
The TV ratings had gone through the roof. The Allison brothers and Richard Petty were broadening the appeal of NASCAR. Petty would win this race 7 times, a mark unequaled to this day.
There was probably 2 or 3 of the races that I should have won that I didn't, but then there was 2 or 3 that I won that I shouldn't have. So it kind of balanced itself out.
Bobby Allison won 3 Daytona 500s over a 25-year career. But his legacy is beset with lingering doubt. Could he have won more? Not just at Daytona Beach, but everywhere, if only he'd gotten out of his own way.
This man won for 16 different teams. 16 different teams. Richard Petty won for what, 2 teams? Think about all the conflicts that Bobby Allison went through. Bobby Allison almost never got fired from a ride. He quit.
Bobby was his own worst enemy. Bobby would not accept the premise when you were hired to just shut up and drive. And there were an awful lot of teams that Bobby drove for. Would slap him on the back in victory lane. And then they'd go back to their shop and they'd unload that car and they would MF Bobby Allison until they had to go to the next race.
I say to him all the time, look at all the championships you'd have won if you had to quit all them cars. How many did Cale win? How many did Darrell win in juniors cars? You'd have won every one of them. Because I know you're as good a race car driver as those guys are, if not better.
Of all the teams that Bobby left, the parting that hurt him the most, that caused him the most regret, was his split from car owner Junior Johnson.
I had a tough time communicating with Junior. You know, Junior felt like the thing should be run by chain of command. If I talked to him about hunting or fishing, he'd jump right in there with it. But if I talked to him about race cars, he didn't answer me.
They couldn't agree. They clashed. They went through a time that they didn't even speak to each other for weeks and months at a time.
Bobby's always said that me and him didn't get along, but I never seen him satisfied with any car owner.
Simply put, Bobby had a chip on his shoulder.
No, he had a tree on his shoulder, not a chip.
He said to me one day, are you going to drive for me next year, yes or no? Because if you don't, I got the best driver in NASCAR to go in the car. And I said, well, if you don't have them right now, get them. And which was so dumb.
That driver, Cale Yarborough, won 45 races and 3 points championships, driving for Junior Johnson.
I was the loser on that deal, and part of that was my personality and my, my attitude about things.
When Junior Johnson sold his team and retired in 1995, in his farewell address to his employees, he told them, if we'd been able to keep Bobby Allison, we would have won 200 races and Richard Petty wouldn't have.
Richard Petty's record would have been by the wayside. That's all we would do.
No doubt.
No doubt.
See this right here? This is the front.
No, that's Talladega at the Speedway, and that was Atlanta. See, that was me and that Chevelle. Davey didn't want to go to the racetrack because the car wasn't painted.
It was primered.
And I said, Davey, the races are tonight, and they all look good in Victory Lane. Get that thing up there.
Bobby and Judy Allison raised their family of 4, 2 boys and 2 girls, in Hueytown, Alabama. The oldest boy, Davey, was shy, and he idolized his dad.
The boys had to learn from the ground up. You know, they had to learn to wash parts. They had to learn to sweep the floor.
I felt like he had to earn his way into this business if he wanted to be in it. For me to try to buy him a better engine than the next guy or a better chassis wasn't the thing to do.
Bobby and I got into a pretty heated argument up in his office. I said, you need to help him get a car. And I had a Nova that was almost unbeatable that I had put on jack stands. Davey was walking across the shop floor there. And for some reason, I just told him, Davey, hook up your trailer and come to my shop. I'm going to give you my Nova. And I told Davey the stipulation was his daddy didn't touch that car.
Over in Level Cross, North Carolina, Petty Enterprises was introducing their next generation to the racing game. The King's son, Kyle Petty, was having an easier time of it, with the best equipment money could buy.
Ellie closes again right in behind Earnhardt. And Earnhardt loses it, goes on the grass, comes back.
One man was fending off young and old drivers alike, carving out an identity for himself, winning championships, provoking adversaries on the track, and making fans off of it.
Down to the inside. Oh, there it goes. Who do you feel hit who on that last thing between you and Darrell?
I just racing. I ain't gonna, me and Darrell's got to race week to week. There ain't nothing to it.
He had a good heart. He just had a bad head. I mean, he had evil thoughts when it came to racing.
If there was ever a chip off the old block, as they say, that was it. Dale Earnhardt was a mirror of his dad in so many ways.
Fuel economy to make it work.
Their driving styles were very, very similar. Their personalities were very, very similar.
In November of 1982, Dale married for a third time. Teresa Houston, from a racing family, was a kindred spirit. And Dale's two children from his second marriage, Kelly and Dale Jr., moved in with them. That's when a familiar pattern began to repeat. Just as Ralph Earnhardt had prioritized cars and career above all else, so did Dale Earnhardt struggle to find time to spend with his kids.
I'm sitting there thinking, man, what's so hard about sitting around here and talking to me for 5 minutes? You know, why you gotta be why you gotta be at the shop all the time on that race car? Why can't I go with you? You know, and I'd had to sit there to 9 o'clock with Teresa and Kelly, and I don't want to be around them.
HR Solutions Chevrolet from Palmdale, California, Ron Hornaday Jr.
But Dale also had been married at age 19, and from that union came a son.
North Carolina, KERRY Earnhardt.
KERRY Earnhardt, raised by his mother and stepfather, had spent some time working the mills of Kannapolis. But he had dreamed of becoming a racer, like his biological father, a man with whom he had no contact until one fateful day.
When I turned 16, I got my license, and the first trip I made was to my grandmother's house. Walked in, talked to my grandmother, and it just so happened the race shop was behind her house. So I walked out the back door into the shop, and Dad remember him working on one of the race cars. As soon as the door opened, he looked up and saw me, and he stopped, put the tools down. We went and got in the car and rode around, went right around the farm and places, just talked.
There was KERRY, just 16, sharing secrets with Dale Earnhardt, a sports legend to millions, a father, finally, to him.
I just talked about the past, the things that we missed, and things that we could maybe do together. Which was a little bit because he was on the road and busy all the time.
KERRY Earnhardt talked, walked, and looked just like his dad. But the similarity ended there. He never made it big on the Nextel Cup scene.
This is the museum. This is the museum, guys.
Fix you right up.
There we go, man.
I'd just like to shake your hand, sir.
Okay,
glad to meet you.
All right, guys. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, okay? All right. This is a 200th car here. Put it in the Smithsonian like in 92. The Smithsonian won't let you touch it if you ain't got a pair of white gloves on. I said, wait a minute, it ain't nothing but a race car. You know, if it gets bent up, we'll fix it. No, 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 no.
It was 1984. Richard Petty had been struggling since his last points championship in 1979, and winning was becoming ever more difficult as he inched towards the 200th victory plateau.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
A screenwriter might be accused of over-sentimentality were he to have scripted what actually occurred. In this uniquely American sport, its greatest star and folk hero won on the 4th of July at Daytona in front of the President of the United States.
It's Richard Petty by a foot. Petty wins his
As time went on and the Darrell Waltrip type came in, the flashier, more glib, one-lining, sarcastic type. You know, Richard told me, in the twilight of his career, he said, they don't want me out front on TV anymore because I can't talk good English.
Richard said, I don't want to quit. As long as I'm having fun, I want to keep racing.
1988. As sure as the Daytona Beach tide rises, it also falls, forever reflecting the fortunes of the NASCAR family.
Bad trouble, bad trouble. A terrible crash. Richard Petty's car has turned over 7 or 8 times coming off turn 4. One of the most violent accidents we've ever seen at the Daytona International.
In my mind, immediately I thought, there's no way he's alive.
I could tell she'd been crying, but she found out it was okay. Then she got mad.
I wanted to cry tears of joy because he was alive, and yet I was just mad at him to think he was still out there.
She walked in there and she looked around and she said, "Are we having fun?"
Back to the lead comes Bobby Allison, seeking his third Daytona 500.
When the race continued, Richard's old nemesis, Bobby Allison, was fighting for the lead with NASCAR's brightest young star.
It's turning into a dream race here in the Daytona 500.
His son, Davey.
But here he comes. He's going to the bottom. He's down low. Bobby Allison high.
I had a reporter come up to me and ask me, well, which one are you pulling for? And I said, the one that pays the bills.
They come to the stripe, the winner of the great American race. Bobby Allison, Davey Allison, his son in second.
Bobby Allison, 3 Daytona 500s, and your son right behind. What could be better than this?
What a thrill for me, what a thrill.
After the race, Davey was asked if he had any regrets about finishing second. No, was the quick response. Because my dad will always be my hero.
I know it happened. I've watched tapes. It's like somebody made a film, some movie, and I have no personal memory of what went on. No personal feel. That would have to be the greatest memory recall of all time. I was going down the highway one night, really early in my young professional life, and came up on a wreck. In the wreckage were 5 dead adults and like 6 or 7 dead children. And I helped take these dead bodies out of these cars. And I thought, this is how uncertain life is. And so I must do the best I can to enjoy life for as long as I can.
Through the 1980s, as Richard Petty's star faded and Darrell Waltrip's rose, Bobby Allison singled out Waltrip as the guy to dislike. The guy to put on top of his personal grudge list.
In the early part of my career, when I wasn't having any success, I used to go down to his house, stay with him, travel together, race together. We were very, very good friends.
Waltrip has retaken the lead on the inside of Allison.
Once I kind of got to where I could rub fenders with old Robert Arthur, he seemed to create a little resentment. We had a few run-ins, and we just became rivals, bitter rivals.
It's the last race ever at Riverside. He wrecked me, sent me down through the infield. And I was really mad about that.
For next week's Pocono, in the driver's meeting, Bobby stands up and he says, let me ask you something. What are y'all going to do when some a-hole runs you off the racetrack and wrecks you and knocks you out of the race?
And with that, Michael Waltrip says, I'm not that asshole, I'm just his brother.
Bobby went back to his hauler, and his teammate came to our truck and he said, I have to come and tell you something. He said, I shouldn't do this because he's my teammate. But Bobby said he's going to wreck you today.
June 19th, 1988. Pocono. Bobby Allison drove his last race. He never challenged Waltrip that day. He wrecked early.
We got a spin back on the backstretch.
His life changed forever.
Bobby Allison involved.
As of that moment, the man who was always driving into the wind would no longer be competing, but just trying to survive.
And we went to the hospital after the race to see how he was doing, and we didn't think he would make it.
The doctor came in to tell me how bad he really was. He had fluid in around his brain, which they say is lethal. And I said, well, he doesn't want to be a vegetable, and I don't want him to be a vegetable. And he says, I'll give you back your husband.
A risky operation was necessary. Bobby had a shunt placed in his brain to drain the fluid.
After he left to go do this operation, I went to pieces. And then all of a sudden, something told me, you've got to stop this because you have a big job ahead of you.
It was starting all the way over. They had to teach me how to talk and walk and eat. And then one morning, I woke up from, what went wrong? Where am I? And what year is this? No memory.
After months of rehabilitation, Bobby Allison reappeared. A little thinner, a little grayer, a little slower, but alive. More and more of his memory came back each day. And soon his younger boy, Clifford, became his pet project.
I was encouraging him to go over and help Clifford and get his interest going back again, you know, not thinking that he would actually be reliving his own career through Clifford.
The track is inorganic, cold. It doesn't grow like a tree with rings to record the passing days. But Michigan International Speedway still remembers August 13th, 1992. Clifford Allison's racing career was taking shape in the ARCA division. He and Davy were poised to carry on the Allison brother family tradition. As his father watched, Clifford went out to practice.
He had told me, Dad, we're gonna get him, we're doing good. And, you know, gave me the high sign. I felt really good about it. I was standing on top of the truck watching them, and they went in turn 3, and the car got a little out of shape, and he overcorrected and went up and hit the wall. He made a mistake.
They tried to stop Bobby from going out there. He wouldn't stop. He told them, that's my boy, I'm going.
I went to the car, and when I got there, I could see he was dead. A couple of the NASCAR people grabbed me and put me in a car, and I didn't know what to do.
He said, when I walked up to that car and saw that boy was dead, knew that boy was dead, there began a hurt that kept on and on and on and has never gone away.
I went to Clifford's viewing and I knelt down on the casket, beside the casket, and I looked at Clifford laying there and I could see my son's face. But it's hard.
Death is part of life. And Clifford was doing what he wanted to do. He was pursuing his own dream. And so it's one of those very unfortunate things in life that I don't have an answer for. I don't have to like it, but I have to accept it.
Dale Earnhardt, there were 7 Winston Cup trophies on the mantle, but no Daytona 500 titles in 19 tries. Daytona has always linked celebration and despair, and for the Earnhardt family, it came to symbolize frustration.
Here comes Earnhardt. At the line, it is Dale Yarborough. This is going to cost Dale Earnhardt the
A
race.
career unfulfilled.
He's going to make it. Dale Jarrett's going to win the Daytona 500.
Coulda, shoulda.
When are you going to win the 500?
Sterling Marlin.
Never won this race. Everybody says, well, this is your best shot. Well, I've had shots just like this.
Something is amiss.
Here comes Duke Coat down on the inside.
And an amazing finish.
Flat tires.
Just a quarter of a lap away from victory.
Those damn Fords.
Dale Jarrett is going to pull it up.
It's the Daytona 500. I ain't supposed to win the damn thing.
Wrecks.
Big trouble, Earnhardt.
It ain't the Daytona 499.
What does Earnhardt have to do?
I'm thinking, man, my dad's gonna be the greatest race car driver ever drive a stock car, and to have not won a Daytona 500.
And over number 3.
Just seemed like this race and this day has always eluded us.
I like that one. Don't you like this one? Sure. That's a sweet one.
Liz Allison, her daughter Krista, and son Robbie. They were so young back then, they don't remember much.
That's funny. That must have been right after that. This is my favorite. It's probably one of my favorite pictures of us. I mean, it was just in happier times, I guess.
But their mom can be counted on to tell them about their dad, Davy.
There it is. Davy Allison wins.
A career so short. Davy Allison won early and often, 19 times in just 7 years as a regular on the Cup scene.
Want to say hi to my grandmother out there. I love you, Grandma. Hi to Liz and Krista and Robbie, too.
The brown eyes, the shy ways that all his competitors talked about.
Davy Allison will win it.
Bobby and Judy's son, Liz's husband, Donnie's nephew. Davy had a brother and 2 sisters, a son and a daughter.
Davy became legitimately the arch rival of Dale Earnhardt. He could have been as good. He could have taken races away from him. That would have been quite a rivalry.
Davy Allison is going to win the Daytona 500.
This is the biggest one of them all. It hadn't even sunk in yet. I can't wait till tomorrow morning when it does sink in.
You embrace those moments because it's the ultimate, just the family element. Davy Allison with his children in his arms, and his wife who can't stop crying long enough to celebrate anything.
Home Track Restaurant, Hueytown, Alabama. The gathering spot for the Alabama gang to break up long hours in the shop. Today, the Allisons still get together here to rehash old times.
Yeah, Davy was always tight. We would do little things to make Davy have to reach in his pocket, you know. Oh, I don't have any money. I don't have any money. And he takes his wallet out, throws it open like that, says, see, and I said, I grabbed his wallet and I opened the flap, and here was all his hidden money in the back. And I said, oh boy, Davy, you got enough for supper too.
Davy was getting a little too, too fast-paced. When everything you reach out to turns to gold, I'm waiting for something to turn around, and I felt like that's how it was with Davy. Sometimes you can live too fast and grab too many things, and I felt like that's what the helicopter was. And that was my argument with him, is that, enough already.
July 1993. Davy Allison was flying his Jet Ranger helicopter to Talladega to watch a friend practice. While maneuvering the chopper, Davy was about to touch down when he lost control and crashed in the Talladega infield.
He is now listed in very critical condition.
I was hopeful, and we had prayed all night, for him like we did for his dad, and said rosaries. And then Liz came and told us that if we wanted to say goodbye, we better go see him right now. It wasn't very long after that they came and told us that he was gone. I literally lost it. My legs, my arms, everything was going in 90 different directions.
There was some sort of security trying to screen Bobby and Judy coming out of there. And I've never seen two people with their faces looking so totally empty. It was just like the life was gone from them.
He touched a lot of people, and they loved him, and we loved him.
How much can fate deny a family? Fate at that point to me had denied the Allisons everything.
Bobby was standing in the driveway, and I walked out there to him, and I didn't say hello or nothing else. He grabbed me, and I grabbed him, and we both started crying. And he says to me, after he got his composure, he said, "What am I gonna do?"
The tragedy of the Allisons just became bottomless to me at that point, because Davy had said, if I get killed in a race car, I'm going to die with a smile on my face. Davy didn't even get that. Davy died with no expression on his face, unconscious, from an air crash.
You certainly question life and you question God, but you find the strength every day. And when you have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old who wakes up in the morning ready to take in life, then you get up and you do that with them because you don't have a choice. I received an interesting phone call from Dale Earnhardt Sr. He said, "I just want you to know that I'm not coming to Davy's funeral." And for just a half a second, I was offended. And he choked up and said, I can't do it, Liz. I cannot come and look at Robbie and Krista and realize that they'll grow up without their daddy.
Bobby and Judy Allison carried on the best they could, but not together. The fire had gone out of their marriage.
We just began to disagree with each other on everything. And then when we lost Davy, it got way worse. She grieved in a different way than I did. You know, I appreciated the people coming up and sobbing and carrying on, and it just broke her heart further.
And it was causing me and him to not be friends anymore.
Bobby was still recovering from his brain injury. And now, with the loss of both their sons, it was too much for the relationship to withstand.
I stayed in the Birmingham area for 2 years in an apartment, hoping that we could, gradually come back together and not get a divorce. Every time he came, he was just cold. There was no warmth, there was no affection, there was just nothing.
We got where we couldn't agree. We just couldn't get along. What's for supper? Nothing.
1996. Bobby was next to broke. The hospital bills had cost him all his savings. His wife had left him, and he was living with his mother in a modular home in Hueytown, Alabama, just across the street from the house where he had raised his family.
The house was for sale. The for sale sign was blown down in the yard. This was on in November, and the leaves were just blowing everywhere. It's a terribly forlorn scene out there. He had lost his sons. He had lost his own health. He had lost his fortune. His wife was leaving him. Everything was gone. And yet, he looked at me and he said, "I tell you what, I've learned how to launder my underwear myself. And I've learned how to cook spaghetti. And I will make it."
The struggles, the joy, the bonds, the breaks, the families, the 500.
Finally, the most anticipated moment in racing. 20 years of trying, 20 years of frustration. Dale Earnhardt will win the Daytona 500.
All of it is racing. All of it is life.
Look out on pit road.
The year was 1998. And for a lucky few, life includes a trip down Victory Lane.
Well, you know what Victory Lanes look like. There's 1,000 people. The media people's going crazy. And he turned around, and when he saw me, he actually looked in my eyes. He said, "There's my sister Kathy," and hugged me. And to me, that was one of the most personal, private moments we had had in a long time.
The Daytona 500 is ours. We've won it, we've won it, we've won it.
And at that moment, I wished we all could have been there.
Lee Petty had long since retired from Petty Enterprises, but was still as combative as ever.
He had a few buddies, they'd go play golf and all, but he'd like to make a wager and a bet here and there. So I guess he's about 70 years old, and another guy, he was 40, accused him of cheating. And Lee, he didn't take that too kindly, so he cold-cocked him and knocked him out.
And Richard Petty's retirement tour was in full swing. 1992 was his last season, and he hadn't won a race in 8 years. But he was still as popular as ever.
The further away you get away from what Richard Petty did, the harder it is to understand. The more you try and justify. Well, they raced 60 times a year, or he had the best equipment. Some of that may be true, but you still have to go back to the fact that he won 7 Winston Cup titles. He won 7 Daytona 500s. He won 200 races. He is the king.
I don't want to be the next person in line behind Richard Petty. That'd be like going to Alabama after Barry Bryant or UCLA after John Wooten, and that's not my style.
No one but Kyle Petty could really know what it was like to walk in the shadow of the king. He showed early flashes of brilliance and even contended for a Cup title in 1992.
Kyle Petty breaks the bank at Rockingham.
He would win 8 races by 1995. But hasn't won since. A career labeled a disappointment. So the focus was placed on the next generation of Pettys, Kyle's son, Adam.
There you go, buddy. Grandfather says to go out there and do the best you can. Dad says to go out there and do the best you can. So that's what I do every time I buckle up.
He didn't have the expectations on him the way Kyle did. But he was Kyle and Patty's son, and everybody loves Kyle and Patty.
I love you, buddy. Love you. We all love you.
It was all set up for Adam to take over. It was all set up for Adam to be the next Richard Petty.
Adam won an ARCA race at Charlotte, and this is the actual car. That was a happy little night there, and then.
Kyle looked out the back window one day and saw Richard and Adam out in the backyard. And he said to his wife, "Well, it looks like Richard finally got the son he always wanted."
By 2000, Adam Petty had 3 years of NASCAR experience under his belt.
And the congratulations of his crew.
But the man who would claim Richard Petty's throne had an heir of his own, burdened with similar expectations and a name to live up to.
One day, he says, if I was going to start a race team tomorrow, I would go get Jeff Gordon, whatever it takes. You know, and he says, look, cut that tape recorder off. I want to tell you something. I got a son coming along that's going to kick his butt.
What a day in history. Dale Earnhardt Jr.
When Dale Jr. came on the circuit, he won a Busch race. And at that time, Dale Jr. lived across the road from the shop in a trailer. Yeah. Dale Sr. said about 2 o'clock Sunday night, Teresa woke me up and there was all this music. And he says, I got up and got in the car and drove over there. And he says, I don't know how many people were over there. He said, oh, they were just rocking and rolling. I ran every one of them off, and I told that boy if he was going to be a race driver, he was going to act like a race driver, or he was not getting any more help at all from me.
Dale Earnhardt Sr. was always sensitive about his lack of education. He had sent his son to military school, but he also wanted him to adopt the work ethic that Ralph Earnhardt had imparted back in that old garage in Kannapolis.
He called and said, in typical Dale's way of doing things, hey, can you put Dale Jr. to work? I can't do anything with him. And, okay, yes, send him up here. We'll give him a job. Typical kid, needed a little direction, I think.
They really taught me everything, as far as the basics from the ground. And I was able to take that back to my father and prove that I had what it took. Well, he was a superhero to me. I was in awe every time I was around him.
How about it? You put your life in your kids, and they win, and you're proud of them, and you're proud of them just growing up and being good kids.
Inside, Earnhardt was a gentle person. We would get in his pickup and ride over the farm and talk about his mother and father and his children, and great big tears rolling down his cheeks.
Guys, right on. Who's this? Who's this? I'm going down.
Strangely enough, he was somewhat of a religious person. He told me that he prayed before every race. Never that he would win, but that nobody would get hurt.
Dale Earnhardt had reached a period of contentment in his life. In the early days, he bounced checks and could barely scrape together the money for a cup of coffee. By the end of his career, he owned yachts, Lear jets, and his own company. He was a millionaire many times over and the most popular athlete in his sport.
Dale Earnhardt was beloved because so many common people who lived paycheck to paycheck had this burning thought in mind. Old Dale made it up from nothing, and maybe I can too someday.
There was little more to prove on the track, though maybe another championship to pass Richard Petty. And all the dysfunction of two failed marriages was a distant memory. He could now bask in the glow of his children's successes, and then there would be time to spend with his grandchildren. Before the start of the 2001 Daytona 500, Stevie Waltrip, as had become the custom, taped a card to Earnhardt's steering wheel with a proverb from the Bible. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe.
Oh! Look at Earnhardt. Sterling got into Earnhardt.
7 laps to go. There he was with his son running for first place, and his car that he owned, driven by Michael Waltrip, and they were running in front of where Earnhardt was with his buddy. He's back there with Schrader and Sterling Marlin, and they're banging around having a good time.
3 wide behind them.
And he can sit back and look at the accomplishments of his life while going 200 miles an hour and say, I'm there. For that moment, I've always believed he had to be happy.
Kelly, Dale's daughter, got on the phone right away when they didn't go back to show the car. That's when I knew something had happened. I just, for some reason, never expected him to die in a race car. It was unreal. Just unreal.
It's hard to say what you want to say without being so emotional, and it's embarrassing to be emotional because Dale, Daddy, they weren't emotional people. But I'm a firm believer in fate and destiny, and his fate was that Dale was going to not be 50 years old because he knew we'd drag him to death when he turned 50. He didn't make it. He would have been 50 in April, and buddy, were we gonna lay it on thick. He'll never be old. That's the one thing about my daddy and Dale both. They'll always be healthy, successful, bigger than life, even in death.
Parents aren't supposed to outlive their children. It goes against nature. The pre-race ritual seems to reinforce that inescapable truth. This is Patty Petty's first visit back to Loudon, New Hampshire, since her son, Adam, died here. He was only 19 years old when he crashed during a practice run in 2000.
Coming in here last night and knowing that Adam wasn't here was pretty hard. I'll say that.
We were looking for Adam, sort of future of Petty Enterprises. But when that happened, then, you know, we were just upside down, just terrible, just stopped everything.
5 weeks earlier, the Pettys had lost their past when their patriarch, Lee, died at age 86.
The evolution of the Petty family in this sport is coming to the end of the road. Where Kyle should be getting out of the car and be the proud pop on top of the truck, giving his son lap times, that isn't there.
And yet, in the aftermath of this tragedy, leaving everything so dark and confused, something unexpected came into view. The sight of Bobby and Judy Allison.
After the memorial service, almost like an apparition coming across the paddock, I see Bobby and Judy Allison together.
And I remember they were walked up to me and they were holding hands. And I grabbed their hands and I said, does this mean that you're together? And they said, yes, we've seen how you and Kyle are leaning on each other. And we've not done that.
Bobby and Judy's reunion had begun awkwardly at the wedding of their daughter-in-law, Liz, Davy's widow.
There's a fine line between love and hate, and they were so angry at one another. So you had to think, if we could just make that passion turn into something good, wow, what a great thing it would be.
I wouldn't even speak to her. And she stepped in front of me as I was walking through the door of that church and said, we should put our differences aside and go try to help the Pettys. And I said, you're right.
So the Allisons left Liz's wedding and embarked on a 15-hour drive from Tennessee to North Carolina for Adam Petty's funeral. 15 hours, tiptoeing around past differences, looking for common ground.
We didn't talk a whole lot, but then a couple of things did come into the conversation. He wanted to know if I would give him a discount in the alimony. I think I shocked him because I said yes.
The Petty's tragedy was pulling them closer.
The only parents on this planet who could possibly identify with what Kyle and Patty were going through. The old vicious rival family, the Allisons, embraced Patty Petty in their time of deepest tragedy. You could just see in Patty's face the strength that it gave her. In 32 years of covering this stuff, I've never seen a moment that tragic and that touching.
Adam brought them back together, which is kind of funny. Let's, roll the tape back to when he was a year old. His first words were, go Bobby Sadison. It's not go Grandpa, and it wasn't go Daddy. It was go Bobby. And we realized at the end of the race, Bobby Allison would come over and pick him up and say, hey man, how you doing? Bobby took that time and he made a connection, and the first words he said were go Bobby Sadison.
It only been 6 months after my dad had died. And I felt like, I'd been handling it pretty good. I took my friends down, and we'd been there for 4 or 5 days already. Hadn't went to the track yet. I was like, let's go to the track. It's nice to see the racetrack without the RVs and the teams there. It's real surreal and quiet and kind of eerie. Before it was a meaningless corner, Now that acre of land is a big piece of my life. I try to imagine why it's not painful for me to go there. But I don't know. It's positive. I get a positive thought.
I always wonder how things would be today if he was still here. I remember him telling my youngest son that he was going to take him deer hunting when he got back from Daytona, and I said, Dad, that's in February, deer season's out. He said, not on my farm. He said, I'm going to take him and get him a deer. And things happened in Daytona and didn't make that trip.
It's the little things. That's what you miss the most. We don't miss the fame and glory because, good gracious, that is really hard for our family because we're an average family. We weren't raised with all that attention. When you're a daughter of Ralph, I don't know if I get through that or not.
I'm sorry.
The number of times that you wish you had stopped and visited. A lot of times with Daddy and Dale Jr., you don't make that effort because you're afraid you'll bother them. You know how many people are tugging on them. And so you want to be the one of the family that doesn't tug on them. We were waiting for Dale to retire so we could have those long conversations again.
Ladies and gentlemen, let them know you're there.
Christmas time at the Victory Junction Gang Camp, established by the Pettys in Adam's memory for kids with life-threatening illnesses.
You tell Santa Claus what you want for Christmas?
A reindeer and a horsey and a unicorn.
Oh, man.
Only 19, but with compassion beyond his years, concerns far beyond his own needs.
Did you have fun? Good.
That was Adam Petty.
This was very much his idea. When we would visit children's hospitals, Adam would say, Mom, these people are paying to be here and it looks like they're poor and they can't afford the things that they want or just something to play with in their hospital room. We visited a camp in Florida and he came away from there going, okay, this is what the Petty family should do. Let's concentrate on one thing, make children happy, and it's free.
Maybe some Tinker Toys?
Tinker Toys.
Did you guys see Dusty?
As we look back on his life, you can say, how did a 19-year-old kid get to this point? Well, the 19-year-old got to that point because God put him in that position.
A new pony, just your size, you can ride all by yourself.
All wounds heal with time. They don't never completely heal. Going and seeing the kids and seeing the camp, then that kind of eases the pain. When you see those kids grin like you see Adam grin, that makes us feel good. We see Adam in these kids.
How are you doing?
Kyle Petty's successes off the track far exceed the mark he made as a driver. While his dad, the King, remains the standard bearer on the track. He still has the gift, still can make every fan feel like the greatest Richard Petty fan alive. Remember, he hitchhiked home from the first strictly stock car race as an 11-year-old in 1949, and he remains a presence today. But with the passage of time and torches, the pride that fed Richard and Bobby's old rivalry has been replaced by perspective, gained through the lives they lived and lost.
Dear Mr. Allison, you have been one of my most favorite drivers. Could you please send me a couple autographs for my son?
So many years, so many memories, so many races.
I admire you for all you have accomplished in your career.
The best one, the day in 1988 he and Davy finished first and second at the Daytona 500. He still can't remember it. A cruel irony. It's one of the few memories that elude him. But always within easy reach, there in his wallet, the picture of his two boys.
I go through periods where it's not very easy. If I were to get that picture out and start looking at it right now, I may cry and I may not. It's incredible mental pain. Nothing like it.
But Bobby continues to push against the storm, living as best he can outside the Charlotte area, remarried to his childhood sweetheart.
Robbie, our son, mine and Davy's son, is 15 now. When he was 11, he wanted to race. And it was something that I actually didn't want for him. As much as I love the sport, I did not want him to have a passion for it. But we put together a little team for him, and he went out and had a pretty good little wreck first night out, and hit his head pretty hard. And he's 11 years old, you know, and he had to be removed and taken to the hospital. And as we're sitting in the emergency room, he looked at me and he goes, "Mom, would Daddy be proud of me right now?"
It was Robbie's last race. But another Allison, Justin, is busy upholding the family legacy with help from his grandfather.
I see him do things, I see things happen in that race car that you got to have a gene to do that. I mean, something's got to be there in order to do that. You're not taught that. It's Allison, it's a Petty, it's a Earnhardt, it's that gene. And I see that in Justin.
Hey, man!
Maybe we have another Allison that can go on and race and get to the big
That
time.
make you happy?
Maybe. And if he can do that and wants to do that, I'll help him every way I can.
You done good though, buddy. You done real good.
This Thursday night.
Ralph will come in for lunch and for dinner, and then usually go back out and work 10 o'clock or so at night. He'd try not to crank no cars up, you know, after about 10. After he passed away, then Dale moved out, you know, used the garage to race out of, and then when he built his place up there at DEI, it was almost like somebody had died again. I mean, I missed hearing those motors crank up.
There was friction in the Earnhardt camp after Dale Sr.'s death. Dale Jr. tried to negotiate for continued service to his father's company, but eventually he severed ties and parted ways with DEI and his stepmother, Teresa.
At 32 years of age, the same age as my father was when he made his final and most important career decision, it is the time for me to compete on a consistent basis and contend for championships now.
The main focus will be on navigating the turns ahead and continuing to honor his family name.
It's been a hell of a life. It's all been really overwhelming, you know, to grow up the way I did and to be where I am today. I don't really know why I'm not married. I can't say I've ran into too many winners, but I've thought of, I mean, I'd love to be married, and I'd love to have a son, run around here, you know, getting into trouble, but, you know, it hadn't worked out yet. It's a great honor to drive race cars with that last name and to win and to be successful and, you know, do what you think would make him and my grandfather proud.
When the motors quiet and cool down and the grandstand's empty, what lingers on the track is the imprint of families. The NASCAR families, the Pettys, the Allisons, the Earnhardts, bound by their bloodlines to the sport, laughing and crying, longing and loving, winning and losing, living for racing.